Welcome, everyone. This is Christina Tanaschuk, Executive Editor of Homeland Security Today, welcoming you to our continuation of our commemoration of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We're very happy to have you join us today, especially because we have a really exciting speaker and someone who really has been on the front lines in Afghanistan. Right now, Afghanistan is a huge issue for all of us, and it's very exciting to have him here. He came home July 2nd after spending 2.5 years in Afghanistan. We have Michael Templeton, who's a retired DEA Special Agent. What we're going to talk about today is an incredibly important piece of our counterterrorism efforts, and that is tracking the money. The Hawala network throughout the Middle East helps everyone move money without much tracking whatsoever. And Special Agent Templeton was in Afghanistan for 2.5 years tracking these networks. And so we wanted to take a look after 20 years since 9/11 on how money is moved, how money is used to fund terrorism, how they move that money, and what we can be doing now and in the future to make sure that that doesn't happen. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce Michael Templeton, retired DEA Special Agent, to talk to us a little bit about the Hawala networks and his work and his advice on us moving forward. Welcome.
Hi, Christina. Thanks for having me.
Of course, we're very proud to have you and really want to start by thanking you for your recent service and frankly for the service throughout your career. So would you tell us a little bit about your story, because it's a great one?
Yeah, so first of all, we need to thank the Gold Star families that have lost loved ones in Afghanistan and in other parts of the world on the global war on terror. I was just blessed to be part of a larger program to where I was working with the military and other people in the U.S. government that donated their time, and their families allowed them to go over to these places and work. And that I'm certainly blessed to have a family who supported me in my efforts to where I could be away for so long, for 2.5 years in Afghanistan and 2 years in Pakistan prior to that. So my story began obviously in college. I was in the accounting program. I was doing well. I knew I didn't want to be an accountant, but one day I was walking into the business building and I saw a piece of paper up on the wall, FBI hiring accounting majors for special agents. Something clicked. I think that everybody reaches a moment in their life where they figure out what they want to do. The lucky ones learn earlier in life, and I certainly was blessed to learn earlier what I wanted to do. And I started researching that. And keep in mind, this is before internet. This is in 1990, or actually 1989 when this occurred. So I had to use word of mouth and talk with people. And then in talking with people, I found out there was such thing as the DEA. And for a young man of age 20 at the time, that sounded even more dangerous than the FBI. So that really clicked with me. And so I started asking questions and calling my local DEA office. And from there, I was hooked. So I got my accounting degree, a bachelor's of business administration with a major in accounting. And then I started my journey, and that journey ultimately led me in a collision course with the Taliban, Al Qaeda, and ISIS 25 years later.
Absolutely. And where were you on 9/11?
So on 9/11, I had been a special agent for 5 years. I was assigned to New Orleans. And I was getting ready to go to drive over to the Panhandle of Florida to teach a class on ecstasy use amongst children and rave parties, which was what I was working on at the time. And my wife called me. She had already moved back to Tennessee, and we had planned on transferring offices and moving back to our hometown here in Tennessee. And she called me. She says, "You need to turn on the television." And so I watched, like along with everyone else, what they saw on the television. And all I could think about was I was packing a go bag to go to 3 hours away to teach a class on ecstasy. And I really didn't care about that anymore. It just didn't seem important. But I drove to Florida and I taught a class to a bunch of police officers and detectives about ecstasy use. And the whole time I just thinking, why why am I even talking about this? There's more things to worry about at this time. It would be another 9 years before I would step in the arena of the global war on terror. I had, like many people who struggle with God, country, family, God is always comes first. The country and the family is always rotating between second and third. And it's a fine balance to strike for many people, the armed forces and everyone else, to how long do you serve and at what cost to your family to do that. So it would be about, it wouldn't be till 2010 until I jumped in the arena. And that's because my family situation with my child and my wife were in a good point to where I could leave them and they would be okay. So at that point in 2010, I volunteered to go to Pakistan. And I stayed in Pakistan for 2 years working with the Pakistani government on counter drug problems there. And that's where I learned about the Hawala network.
Excellent. So how you learned about the Hawala network in Pakistan, and then what made you start pursuing and understanding the challenges that the network poses for U.S. intelligence?
So, yeah, so the DEA, in addition to obviously trying to arrest drug traffickers, seize drugs, we always try to follow the money, whether it's domestically or internationally. We are in over 75 countries around the world. We have 4,000 agents. And so we have a good network of information sharing and following the money, no matter where it goes in the globe. So in Pakistan, I learned quickly that the drug flow from leaving Afghanistan through Pakistan was about 40% based on CENTCOM estimates at the time. So to give you background on the global drug trade, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, Afghanistan is the #1 producer of opium in the world. And last year, they produced 6,000 metric tons of opium. To put that in perspective, the entire Andean regions of South America, which is Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, only produced about 1,000 kilos of cocaine. So multiply that times 6 for opium. The opium then is processed down into different forms of heroin. And even when it's processed into heroin, you're still at a 3-to-1 ratio of heroin over cocaine. And that's coming from just one country, Afghanistan, to supply the world market. 40% of that was going through Pakistan. It would go to the port of Karachi out on container ships, and also through Iran, and then through the northern route through the Balkans and up through Russia into Europe. So it's going out through the globe. Now, once those drugs go out through the globe, the money has to come back somehow. They do not use the formal financial system to do that. It would be very easy for U.S. Treasury to track large amounts of money moving between nations that we need to keep a track on anyway. So they use the Hawala network, and that's where I learned that it's a problem, and there's not many people that understand the Hawala network, and there's not many people who are focused on the Hawala network.
So what would you say is the biggest challenge with tracking them, or the challenge for us and our government in tracking that money and making sure we know what's happening?
I think #1, there's a lack of understanding of the proliferation of the Hawala network. It's not a one-off. It is the primary method of transferring narco-terrorist money around the world. The heroin trade, the opium trade in Afghanistan is capable of producing $2.1 billion per year. That's CENTCOM estimates. The Taliban, along with their partners Al-Qaeda, have been taxing the opium trade in Afghanistan for years, and they continue to do so. They're taxing it at the farmers when the farmers are growing it, to where the smugglers are smuggling it, and to where it exits Afghanistan into Pakistan and Iran. Everybody's paying their opium tax. The Taliban has what's called zakats, Z-A-K-A-T, zakats throughout the country. There's 34 provinces in Afghanistan. So just think of that as 34 states. And in each state, there's a Taliban tax collector. The tax collectors do not have to go out to 32 million Afghans to collect taxes. They all know where they are. They sit in brick and mortar spots in major district centers throughout Afghanistan. If you're going to smuggle anything in Afghanistan, you have to come find the zakat and get your tax stamp and pay a tax to the Taliban. So their 2018 CENTCOM estimates with the Taliban was making over $450 million a year just on the taxes of opium alone. That is going to exponentially increase now that the Taliban completely control the country. And that's only for opium exportation. The Afghanistan is also rivaling Morocco between the #1 and #2 countries in the world in producing hashish. And they're also learned from the Iranians to produce super labs of methamphetamine. So there's clearly the capability of the drug market to well exceed $2 billion per year, and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have complete access to all that money.
It's a terrifying thought. With everything going on in Afghanistan, it's a terrifying thought to think that that much money could be flowing to terrorism. So how did you develop your way of tracking these Hawala networks and the money moving between them?
So it started with a drug seizure. And in this particular case, it started with a drug seizure on the high seas off the coast of East Africa. With the Fifth Fleet, there's a program where they boarded a ship that wasn't flying the correct flag, and they found 200 kilos of opium. And it's just from there, you're just tracking what phone calls were made from that ship back to the land-based contact, in this case, Pakistan. Then you trace that phone, who's that guy in Pakistan talking to in Afghanistan? We followed those phone calls to Helmand province, which, as most people know, is the #1 province in Afghanistan and in the world that produces heroin, or opium, the Helmand River Valley. And that's where we've lost a lot of Marines, and we've had thousands of Marines and other service members lose their legs and their eyesight and everything. It's a bad spot. So we traced it back to Helmand, and in Afghanistan at the time, up until last month, in fact, we had a judicial wire intercept program. So it was basically a wiretap program that was authorized by the government of Afghanistan. A judge in Afghanistan signed the warrant, and Afghanistan's listened to the phone based on the probable cause, the affidavit requesting to listen. In those phone calls, we were able to hear drug traffickers and Hawaladars moving their money. And so that was the #1 technology that helped us, is we can hear their conversations. We had 100 monitors. They all spoke Pashto, Dari, and English at least. And then we had one individual that spoke 7 languages. So we were pretty much able to cover any language in Afghanistan to be able to build that probable cause to help our Afghan counter-drug partners to develop cases. And we would help them write the search warrants and the arrest warrants and plan the operations to send them out, in many cases with help of our U.S. forces, especially with ISR overhead support with gunships and the ability to watch them in case they got in any trouble. So all those tools came together to where we would track the money. And it was my job in Afghanistan. We actually had 2 jobs. There was only about 6 of us there covering the entire country. And the world's heroin problem, there were 6 agents. My particular job was, I was a liaison between DEA and JSOC Forward elements, the Joint Special Operations Command Forward elements who were there in Afghanistan, whether it be the 75th Ranger Regiment, the Navy SEALs, or Delta, and all that package that comes with them, not just the boots and the shooters, but all that intelligence apparatus and other people that support that program. In addition to that, I was the person in charge of counter threat finance for DEA. So I would assist the DEA vetted units in standing up a counter threat finance group of people whom I trained, advised, and assisted. And so I worked with them and sent them out throughout the country to do these search warrants and arrest warrants.
And what was the most difficult part of tracking them?
Well, the difficult part in Afghanistan, obviously, is the austere environment. We did have a vast network of informants, which really helped pinpoint where people are. Keep in mind that these Hawaladars, just like the zakat tax collectors are in brick and mortar spots. They have advertisements on the internet. They have a glass window on their office in their building that tells them the phone number, who they are, and that they're a money exchanger. So it wasn't that hard to find them if you have the right people on the ground. Of course, that's the challenge now, right? Because we're not there, and we don't have the ability to manage a vast network of informants throughout Afghanistan to pinpoint and take photos for us, to go in and speak to these Hawaladars. We don't have that anymore. They're also using encrypted applications such as WhatsApp to communicate. Many times we were listening to their phone calls when they were using regular conversation, phone to phone throughout Afghanistan, and they say, "Hey, we need to switch to WhatsApp." And normally that was because they were getting into an area they didn't want to be intercepted. They knew that the U.S. government has been there for 20 years, and we had intercept capability. So I would say that's the two challenges at the time.
So your network of people helped you a lot. Are there other technologies that you used that also helped you track them?
Yes. So our judicial wire intercept program would give us a triangulation based on cell phone towers. So we were able to put a person in a particular area up to maybe, let's say, 2,000 meters. Now, that sounds pretty good if you're in a rural area. You can pinpoint someone's compound in a rural area. But if it's in the city of Jalalabad or Kabul or Herat or Kandahar city, you have a lot of people in those, and it's very difficult to pinpoint somebody. But that's where you use a culmination of not only technology, but also your human people on the ground who once you narrow it down to a location, you use informants or law enforcement to go in that area and try to find that person. But again, with Hawaladars, their downfall is that they are in a static location in a brick and mortar place, and that's going to continue. They're not going to just move around and hide. They want people to know where they are. It is a business, and they're charging 1% to 2% transaction fees to move money both in Afghanistan, regionally through Iran, Pakistan, and also globally. We tracked, we intercepted phone calls where these Hawaladars were moving money to all over Europe, Canada, Australia, Southeast Asia, New York, and Washington, D.C. In some of these cases, some of these phone calls were up to $500,000. There's one particular phone call where an individual, two Hawaladars were talking. He said he had a $500,000 transaction in the United States. The other individual said, "We need to switch to WhatsApp," and we lost the call. And what's disconcerting about that is the 9/11 Commission report details that the cost of planning, training, and implementing the attacks on 9/11 cost $500,000 total. And this is one phone call that they're able to move $500,000 into the United States. And that's not going to be seen by the U.S. Treasury. It's not going to be seen by any banks. It's just based on the Hawaladar network.
It's mind-boggling to think about it. And as you approach these networks and searching for them, and with the limitations that we have, and a lot of technologies that really work in their favor, what common sense really helped you track them and find them?
Well, you got to have an all-inclusive approach. You have to have people in the country where it's occurring. You have to have people in the United States that understand the threat of the Hawaladar network poses on our homeland. We are not there yet. There are districts throughout the United States, including in New York and other places, that don't understand the threat posed by Hawaladar network. To be a Hawaladar in the United States is completely illegal. It carries up to a 5-year prison sentence simply by acting as an unlicensed money remitter, is what it's called. You can't do that. And they advertise in local papers in the city and online. They may say simply, we move money, cheap rates to North Africa, or cheap rates to the Middle East. Those people need to be looked at by our FBI counterterrorism groups, and they need to be cracked down on by the FBI, Homeland Security, and the DEA if it's involving drugs. And the U.S. attorneys in these districts throughout the United States, particularly in New York and Washington, D.C., need to make examples of Hawaladars before the problem occurs. It's easy. It's pretty good. It's easy for the United States to solve crimes. We're very good at that. They solved 9/11. After 9/11, they showed how money was moved. They tracked the bank accounts. We figured things out afterward. The challenge is preventing the next 9/11. And that's why it's so important to get the message out so everybody understands the threat, knows what their role is, and that they have an important role, and that we can prevent the next 9/11 if we focus where we need to put our efforts into.
Excellent. And that's exactly why we wanted to talk with you throughout this 9/11 20th anniversary commemoration. We've been talking to people that have really been on the streets, like our heroes that are on the front lines, really learning about this from a very practical sense and trying to help the community understand all of the different pieces we need in place to make sure the 9/11 never happens again. How do you think the U.S. is positioned 20 years after 9/11?
Well, I can only speak to the counter threat finance side of things. I will not go into military application. I was not in the military, and I'll leave that to other folks. I did work closely with the intelligence community, with both the CIA, FBI, of course, with DEA, and work closely with JSOC. I can tell you that I'm concerned with not necessarily the capability of all those organizations to get a handle on Hawaladar networks. I'm worried about the fact that they don't yet take it seriously, that is going to be the next threat. The next attack on the United States or on our allies is not going to be funded through the formal financial banking system. They've learned their lesson on that. And why would they, if they have Hawaladar network throughout the world where they can move money unseen and not going through the formal banking system, why on earth would you do that? So that's my biggest concern right now, 20 years later, is that everybody needs to get educated on counter threat finance and true counter threat finance. And I'll give you an example. When I first got into Afghanistan, the U.S. military, they had a group of people who were called counter threat finance. And so they would go out and they would use DEA statistics as well as their own statistics. So if DEA throughout the year seized X amount of opium from 50 different opium labs, and then CENTCOM on their own did a bombing campaign and bombed 50 heroin labs throughout Afghanistan, they would use imagery and guesstimate on how much opium or heroin is at the lab. And then they would come up with a dollar figure for revenue denied. And so at the end of the quarterly, they would get on a video chat just like we're doing and talk about revenue denied. We think we've denied the Taliban the ability to procure $20 million this quarter. Well, in the entire time that DEA was there and everything they were doing, at one time we had 100 personnel, DEA alone, in Afghanistan in 2010. We had our own air wing. We had a judicial wire intercept program with 50, or actually 100 monitors. We had a sensitive investigations unit, which is a plainclothes equivalent of DEA, but they're Afghans who we mentored. They were usually numbered around 35. And we also mentored a national interdiction unit of over 600 commandos. All that fell under the Counter Narcotics Police of Afghanistan for the sole purpose of doing what we're talking about, and that's seizing drugs and arresting major drug traffickers. In all our efforts, the most we ever seized or destroyed was 2% of the annual opium production in that country. So if CENTCOM combined with DEA was only to destroy 2 to 3 to 4% of the opium production in that country, let's talk about, earlier I said it produces $2.1 billion per year. You're not denying the Taliban or Al Qaeda enough resources to conduct attack on America or our allies by doing that. So you have to cut off their money. We do that here in the United States. We do that against the Mexican cartels. It always hurts the cartels in Mexico more when we seize their money going south than it does drugs coming north, because there's a relentless supply of drugs.
So would you say that this kind of lack of experience or knowledge is the biggest threat you see to the US in the next 5 to 10 years?
I do, unless the people in the right places get an understanding and put people in place with a goal in mind to work together to combat this issue. If no one addresses it, yes, surely you don't have to wait 5 years for that. It's there now. When last year I initiated a case called Operation Griffin's Wharf. Griffin's Wharf was seeking to identify every zakat, every Taliban tax collector in Afghanistan. We wanted an understanding of who those major tax collectors are who are sitting in those 34 provinces. Because again, you have 200,000 people involved in the drug trade in Afghanistan during harvest season, but you only have less than 50 to 100 Taliban tax collectors. It's much easier to target the people who are collecting the money than going after all those drugs in a war environment. So in the process of identifying these tax collectors using both HUMIT, which is our informant network, and also using the Judicial Wire Intercept program, we were able to identify an individual in Afghanistan in eastern Nangarhar province on the Pakistani border. He commanded well over 150 Taliban fighters, but he was Al-Qaeda. And he spent 6 years in Gitmo, was released from Gitmo, and he's back on the scene. This is just last year. Al-Qaeda controls a large portion of the Taliban's movements, tax collection, and they have the ability to collect a portion of that $2.1 billion. There's been a lot of talk about, well, the Taliban only want to control Afghanistan. They don't want to come to the homeland. They don't want to go to Europe to attack any of our allies. That may or may not be true these days. I don't know that, but Al-Qaeda certainly wants to attack the homeland, and they are neck and neck, shoulder to shoulder with the Taliban in collecting all these drug funds, and they have the ability to move it worldwide, unseen, unless we get smart on it.
It does sound like the biggest threat we have to worry about in the next 5 to 10 years, or at least one of the indicators that something might be happening on US soil to be tracking those funds. I know you talked a lot about money moving in and out of New York and how that's incredibly possible now through those Hawala networks. So that's fascinating. So when you look at all of that, one of the things that we've tried to do here at Homeland Security Today is ask all of our contributors at this time to ask and put out there some of the policy questions facing our leadership. This is not meant to be a political series. This is not meant to get into politics. It's meant to stay practical. And at this point, with our withdrawal from Afghanistan and the networks that you're aware of, and I'm sure there are many others who've tracked other pieces and modus operandi of the folks in Afghanistan, what would you say are some of the critical policy questions before our leadership today?
Well, I think across the board, number one, State Department. State Department has underneath the State Department is the INL. So INL funds hundreds of millions of dollars per year to different countries, whether it be for policing, the judicial part of things, the prisons. They need to get smart on how to teach and send people who know what they're talking about into these countries to teach the people in that country how to combat the Hawala network, or at least how to monitor it. You know, a lot of countries, it's legal. It's legal in Afghanistan. You're supposed to get a license in Afghanistan to be a Hawala dar, aka money exchanger. There's currently over 3,000 licensed Hawala dars just in Afghanistan. They have networks throughout Europe, throughout the world. So all these places need to have an understanding of what the Hawala dar network is. Someone needs to go train them on how to monitor them using technology, using HUMIT, and be able to impose those nations' laws against anybody that has any infractions. Just like the United States, it's illegal to be an unlicensed money remitter. And I'm sure it is in other parts of the world. If you're unlicensed and you're moving money, it's illegal. In the United States, it carries 5 years in prison. that has to be addressed. It has to be cracked down on. So the policy decision is, here's the problem. What are you going to do about it?
So you're only posing questions to the State Department, or did you have some others?
No, that's one example.
Yeah.
The FBI needs to know. The CIA needs to know. Homeland Security Investigations needs to get smart. DEA needs to get smart. It's not like there's a dozen or more people that know about the Hawala network. You know, we move around just like every other federal employee, it seems like. You could have myself who worked in Pakistan and then went back to Afghanistan. That's by choice. You also have a lot of people who spend most of their career in South America who've never touched a Hawala network. So there's a small pool of people throughout the government wide service, whether it be with DOD or DOJ components or State Department, CIA, that even know anything about Hawala. And if they do, it's more than just they went to a 2-week school. There's a small group of people that have actually been out there with on the ground in these countries and assisting their foreign counterparts on how to monitor Hawaladars, how to ensure that they're complying with that country's banking regulations. And if they violate those countries' banking regulations, they need to be punished. And if you don't do all of that, then you're leaving it wide open for terrorists to move money globally without anybody looking at it.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you so much for your service and for talking with us today. We really appreciate your time and your really clear explanation of the Hawala network. And just for our audience's edification, we did discuss, you know, the confidential versus top secret versus what type of conversation we're having today. Nothing that we've talked about is confidential or top secret. These are all things that you can learn from open source sources, but it is a way from someone who's served in Afghanistan, who's served tracking these networks, to let us know the state of terrorist financing. So that drug terrorist financing network and nexus is certainly still alive, and we'll have to see how Afghanistan plays out now that we've pulled out. But it's been fascinating talking with you, and we want to thank you for your service, and certainly thank you for contributing to helping us prepare for the next 20 years. So with that, we want to wish you well, and thank you very, very much for contributing.
It's been my pleasure, and I'm available anytime. I appreciate it.
Thank you.